Hello, and I guess welcome to the next instalment of Project Nolan, as we're calling it. My name's Nick Sayward. I'm media teacher at the South Sefton campus, and this is a sort of part of the podcast that Matt and I record, South Sefton Scribbles. Matt's obviously with us. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Nick.
Today we're reviewing Memento, aren't we?
Yep.
This is Christopher Nolan's I think first cinema released film, as far as I know. That came out in the year 2000. It stars Guy Pearce, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Joe Pantoliano.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. So this is a film which is a really interesting one, and I gave you the task the other day of being able to give us a synopsis without, I suppose, spoilerized. First of all, the kind of the narrative devices used, because I think that's quite a key part of the viewing experience, but also the various twists and turns in the story itself. So that's the challenge. So go for it.
Okay, I'll try. Well, a bit of background on the film. I said it's his first cinema release, and it was based on a story he wrote with his brother, or his brother Jonathan wrote. And Nolan tells a story how he was on a road trip across America with his brother, and he was told him the story and pitched him the idea, and then decided to adapt it into a film. So it follows our protagonist is played by Guy Pearce. He's called Lenny, and he's a former insurance salesman. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. He deals, personal insurance claims.
Yeah, but it just tells his story, and he's someone who has been involved in a severe trauma earlier in his life, and as a result of that, he develops a strange form of amnesia. And I think it's a real condition, but it's been exaggerated quite a bit for the film. But he can only remember, he only has a short-term memory of 10 minutes, doesn't he? And he can't form any new memories.
That's right.
His last his last real memory is the death of his wife, the murder of his wife. And so the film tells his story basically as he's trying to investigate the death of his wife and trying to find the culprit that he only has his name, and he's called John G. And because of his memory, he does that through a series of Polaroid photos and tattoos on his own body. And that's the main story, really. But there's, it's told through his story, but also a series of flashbacks, isn't it? And he tells, which take the form of a story about another character.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all of this has a lot of different interweaving characters that come in and play their part in his life. Although he can never, of course, his condition means that he can never really fully trust people unless he's made a note of that himself, either through these aforementioned Polaroids and tattoos. And he sort of uses the tattoos and Polaroids almost as a collection of clues as he makes his way through. So in that way, Lenny becomes our kind of quite traditional investigator, detective, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Before we go on and talk about the things we have talked about here, I'll just quickly address the fact that this was on your list of films. This came in at number 6 in your list. I know we've done 10 and 9 so far, and actually this wasn't in my 10 to 6, but we're doing it now because I'll slight spoiler for this. It was my number 5, and interestingly, the reason I think I put it at 5 was kind of partly because I knew that I definitely wanted this to be in my top 5. I couldn't almost let this out of the top 5, and part of the reason for that was that I don't know if it's the same for you. This was the first Nolan film I ever saw. Was it the same for you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's always stayed with me. I think that this is the movie that probably is similar to everyone else because it was the first one to get cinema release. But this is the film that really made me see Christopher Nolan as an exciting talent, as someone whose films I was desperate to see more of. And it was mainly because of that really interesting, unusual narrative format, if you like, or structure. And I think probably about halfway through this, we are going to have to kind of start talking about it. I'll put up a warning for spoilers, but because I don't think we could do the film justice as a review without talking about that.
Yeah.
But before we get to that aspect and element of it, What do you love about this film? What is good about this film without any of the kind of twists and turns and stuff?
Well, rewatching it's been quite interesting because I think the first time I saw it was when I was at university. I don't think we studied the film, but obviously people were talking about it and dissecting it, and it was one of those films like Donnie Darko at the time that was considered, I think it was like a gateway into like more highbrow cinema, if you like. So I thought I had a certain understanding of the film or idea of it, and then watching it again, it felt like watching a different film actually because I haven't seen it for quite a while. And what I love about it is like the nature of the story itself, but how it's like woven together, and how it feels very complex, and it is very complex in the way it's put together, but also there's a simplicity to it, and the way Nolan weaves the story, and how easy it is to follow as an audience while feeling complex. I just thought it was amazing.
It's a really good point. Yeah, the fact that, I mean, it hits you immediately, and that's why I don't think we want to spoiler how the film is put together, because that's part of the immediate impact it has on you, isn't it? That's why it's unforgettable. Funnily enough, I think my experiences in it was very similar. I remember watching it in a screening room at John Moores University, I think in my third year, because that's when it came out. It wasn't a film we were studying, so it was just something that the tutor said, you need to see this film. And like you said, it is a sort of gateway between that kind of mainstream and sort of more complex authentic cinema. Just remember feeling like this is something very special. As a coincidence, though, my dissertation in my third year at university was all about film noir. And I was actually studying postmodernism and film noir and looking specifically at the case study of two different Coen brothers films. But it meant that I was doing a lot of reading and watching of modern or postmodern noirs at the same time. And this definitely falls into that category, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's often called like a neo-noir or part of like a new type of noir, but it's got loads of elements. It's got, Lenny's like very much a hard-boiled detective, even though he's not a detective, he's a detective type. Carrie-Anne Moss's character, Natalie, is very interesting, isn't she? Because she appears friendly and, her character changes quite a lot without giving any spoilers away. So she could be considered a femme fatale in many ways.
Absolutely. In terms of the information she provides Lenny in his investigation, but also the sort of suspicion and doubt as to whether she can be someone who is trusted as well. Is such a key part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's right through the mise-en-scène, isn't it? A lot of back alleys and it's downtown. And film noirs always take place in big cities, but the big city isn't like a backdrop. It's always like the alleys and the dark pubs and these shady characters, and it's just exploring the underworld. Yeah, it's like a great take on a modern take on the old genre.
Yeah, it has everything right through to the sort of voiceover aspects as well. Some of the sequences are filmed in black and white, again, which gives it that noirish feel, alongside the and again another word I'm mispronouncing, the chiaroscuro lighting with the sort of contrast between black and white, and some of this the sort of contrast is turned right up, isn't it? So it almost feels impossible to make out aspects. But even in the color images, you notice that sort of characters are framed in a way that makes them almost seem kind of untrustworthy. This is Lenny's sort of sidekick Teddy, who's trying to help him along the way. Again, someone who's thrown into sort of shade as to whether or not we can trust him or not. All of these different aspects come in, so it's incredibly noirish, isn't it? In its feel. What about the themes of the movie? Is that carry on? Is it sort of feel noirish in the themes it tackles?
I'd say so. For the individual characters, it's not maybe hasn't got like a connection to like a larger societal point, maybe like old like Warner Brothers film noirs in particular. It's very like contained. But theme-wise for the characters, I mean, you've got it's an unreliable protagonist, but also, it's a hard-boiled detective, and it's like a fractured or fragile masculine character, isn't it? Looking for identity in a world that he doesn't seem to have any anymore.
No, and it's incredibly that we've mentioned flawed male characters before as a trope of the Nolan films. Obviously with Cobb in the protagonist in Following, and Al Pacino's character Dormer in Insomnia. Lenny's sort of a classic makeup of this, isn't he? He's broken essentially, and he's trying to fix himself, and he's trying to do it through all these kind of almost masculine ways, but failing at each turn, really, isn't he? It's really a really good examination of a kind of character who's trying to enact certain masculine tropes. Could we tie that to noir? Because of course the noirs that you mentioned of the hard-boiled era were they were all very masculine, often played by kind of Hollywood hard nuts, as it were.
I think a lot of the characters in like the classic noirs, the 40s and 50s, were dealing with displacement in society after like World War II, and like changing concepts of order in society and where they sat. I think, I don't know, I haven't really thought about this too much, but Lenny, it's much more of a personal, internal struggle about his identity in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And he doesn't have a place and he can't find it. So maybe there's something going on there with, the turn of the century. And again, it's one of those, I think, underlying themes in Nolan's work. I mean, in this film, we almost literally have two Lennys. And it's the same with, Bruce and Batman. In Cobb, there's the real world Cobb and his various dream states. So, identity is very much there.
Searching for that identity, that idea of the human condition as well, just comes through that. And I guess, I suppose, a lot of these themes, which are sort of traits of Nolan's work, really are expressed a lot more clearly through that alternative narrative system that we keep talking about. So I guess we've probably gone as far as we can without spoiling most of this, but I think probably it's the time to just let people know, if they're watching at home, if you've never seen Memento, stop this right now, go and watch the film. I watched it on Amazon, I think, possibly, or even I think it was on Amazon, but find a copy. Borrow one off Matt if you're at the college.
I was going to say, if you're watching this while you're in college, come to our film class for the film library. We've got multiple copies.
We have several copies because we've again asked students to study this even when it's not been part of the course in the past. So I think that's been up for long enough. So yes, we can finally discuss that narrative system. And I think often it gets known as the film that goes backwards, which is a bit of a misnomer, really. But the structure of flashbacks, it's sort of a parallel narrative, isn't it, in a way, where some of the alternate scenes move towards forwards in time, if you like, and the other parallel narrative, the scenes move backwards. So you have a system where you're eventually moving towards the middle of the film, I guess. Is that a good enough description of it?
Yeah, I think it's as good as any I've heard. But I think before we talk about his narrative, if you look online or you see articles about Nolan's work, or even videos online, he's always characterized as a non-linear filmmaker. And Memento is always sort of identified as the perfect example of his style. But if you look at his work, he's strictly linear throughout his entire body of work. And you're right. So we've basically got two linear narratives running parallel, and that's how he structures his films. He always has parallel narratives structured at different levels, and we intercut between them. It just so happens in this one of them is playing the scenes in reverse order. So
what happens is it sort of emphasizes just how linear it is, because there's no you couldn't take a scene out of this film and the film still makes sense.
No.
In fact, in some ways, I mean, I suppose that's an argument why the film could be maybe a slight flaw in the film. I mean, it could be argued, I don't believe this, but is that it doesn't really allow for much character development when you have to have it. Every scene serves the plot, every scene serves the narrative. But as you said, it's often kind of sort of a bit of a misnomer that his films are non-linear. They are linear. What I love about this is any film where you've got a director who has to draw a diagram for you to understand it. It's good by my standards. I think that means you've earned the film, And this is just a screen grab of a YouTube video of Nolan explaining just why his film is linear. how does that structure then inform some of the themes that we were talking about? Why does the structure play such an important role?
Well, I think on its most basic level, I saw an interview with Nolan where he was talking about this, and he was describing how he always gets a story first, and the form or the shape of the film is in service to the story, and not the other way around.
Right.
I think when you're dealing with a character with insomnia, his memory only lasts 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So there has to be a natural reset of that, and it wouldn't really work in a normal linear, or a film where the scenes are chronological.
Yeah. So you can. And it allows him to share that with the audience as well, so that the gaps in his knowledge are just as similar to gaps in our own knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah. So we start every segment, don't we, with a blank slate almost, and over those 10 minutes, we sort of understand in a sort of reverse way what's happening and why he's there. But the reason it's linear is that then informs the next scene, which informs the next scene. We'll come back to themes. Well, again, we talked about identity, didn't we? And I think one of the things that's interesting about this character is that he has a lot of these, again, motifs or these mementos at the start of the film that have questions on. So the Polaroid of Teddy as "don't trust his lies," and we don't get the answer to that till at the end of the film, do we? So the narrative is structured as we also understand or learn about his memories with him.
And I think that's also key to the themes as well of trusting memories and how unreliable memory is as a sort of a basis, if you like. I mean, this is taught. Lauren teaches this in psychology, I believe, the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, which, because often I think most of us who are, would assume that an eyewitness is a key way of cracking a case, but psychologists, eyewitness testimony is so unreliable that the police often won't use it. They'll look for more evidence than that. And Lenny talks about this in the film, and I think the film structure makes us as an audience, really apprehensive about the things that we can trust and can't trust, and we cling on to things. Yeah. And of course, seeing as we're in spoilers, the ultimate twist is that we can't trust Lenny, who we've attached ourselves to all along, because he lies to himself, doesn't he?
Yeah.
How does he do that? What does the character do to sort of draw us in, and then for us to realise that he lies to himself and obviously us as well?
Yeah. Well, I think we sort of empathise with Lenny through the character in the flashback sequences of Sammy Jankus, don't we?
Yeah.
So Lenny is narrating, or he's talking on a phone call. He's talking to someone. He's telling the story of one of his former clients who had this exact same condition. And as we see that story and Sammy's story deteriorate, and we feel like really sorry for his wife, and it's a really tragic situation, we sort of attach that to Lenny. But then there's a few moments later, like halfway through the film, or in the last third of the film, where he makes a conscious decision to lie to himself, doesn't he? About erasing things or notes he's made. And he consciously lies. And obviously the big lie at the end, where he basically fulfills his quest, but he makes the decision to repeat it.
That's right.
The cycle.
He tattoos, because the clues appear on his body as tattoos. And he decides to tattoo something on his body which is not true. We know demonstrably that it's not going to be the solution.
Yeah.
So we know that he lies to himself. Again, this is the classic Nolan as well. Characters that make their own rules and then break them throughout the movie, which is really nice. Like Lenny came up so many times in my thoughts when watching all of the Nolan movies. I think what's really interesting about this film as well is that it still leaves elements of doubt in your mind. So I think even people who have watched this film before, hopefully the conversation we're having will make them go back and watch it again, things they've not noticed. Did you find that? Were there any bits that you hadn't noticed before, or little scenes and clips, or did it change your mind on what happened at all?
Well, I'd forgotten. I didn't expect to. I forgot about the ending. With the final, what we just talked about, where he decides to lie to himself, I forgot about that element of it. So I thought that, in my memory, he did the deed, resolve his own narrative, and then that was the end of it.
Yeah.
But I should have known better after watching rewatching Nolan films, because a lot of his protagonists have ambiguous endings, don't they, in some way.
Absolutely, yeah. And in your mind though, because this is a discussion I had. I've watched this film a dozen times easily, and it was only about on the 6th or 7th viewing that it made me consider that perhaps his wife actually isn't dead. Okay, that actually he's continued this on, and his obsession, again another Nolan male protagonist trait, his obsession with finding John G meant that his wife was couldn't live with him anymore. His condition meant that he was unbearable to live with, and it had overtaken his life. And then when I was watching it the last time, I said because I watched it with my wife, and I said, do you think his wife is still alive, or did she die? And she said, no, he's dead. His wife's dead, but Lenny killed her.
Yeah.
Because of the what's it called, the insulin.
Yeah.
Whereas Sammy Jankis' wife sort of did this thing to prove whether or not he's dead. Lenny did that to his wife. So what are your feelings on this? Is Lenny's wife still alive or not?
That's really interesting. I think I just went with, I think what's meant to be the intended reading. What I thought at least was that Sammy is basically Lenny,
right?
And that's what happened to his wife. But now that I think about it, maybe she could have left. And I think a couple of times throughout the film, or at least one time, someone questions the validity of his condition. It's probably a couple of times.
Yeah.
And could it be something else like displacement or some sort of deep psychological shock?
Yeah. I mean, the idea that
I think I just assumed his wife had died.
What, by testing him to see if he could remember and administering the insulin. And so on. I mean, there is a shot that I only noticed again after a few viewings of the one of where he's telling the story of Sammy, who ends up in a care home, and he's watching an orderly walk past, and Sammy's sat in a chair, sorry, and as he walks past, the orderly walks past the camera. The split second as the scene changes is actually Guy Pearce as Lenny, not the actor who plays Sammy Jankis, which kind of suggests that possibly is. Is.
I'll have to watch it again.
So it's a film that leaves you in a lot of doubt, doesn't it? But is that part of the point? Do you think that does that?
I think and it's part of the appeal. But I think I've seen online there's a lot of division over Nolan, and I think I joined some Facebook groups where the tone of the discussion, if you like, was maybe a bit more academic, or however you want to describe it.
Yeah.
And Nolan, he seems to be like a Marmite character. People really love him, or people really despise him. But I think some of the things people don't like about him is that he's trying to make, I don't know, they criticize him saying he's still too Hollywood and he makes big blockbusters, and other people, I think, overstate how cerebral his films are.
Yeah.
But I think what I like about him and Memento, all of his work in particular, is just how he combines those two things perfectly. And I think he walks the line perfectly, and no one else is doing it. And it's proven he's one of the few filmmakers, I imagine, who gets such high critical and commercial success at the same time.
I mean, his films always have these kind of aspirations to be quite challenging and, like you said, cerebral. They certainly invite conversations about psychology and but also narrative as well. And yet the filmmakers he aspires to are people like Spielberg and Lucas, which we would consider to be a lot more mainstream, wouldn't we? A lot more sort of popcorn filmmakers rather than sort of cerebral filmmakers in some ways.
Oh yeah, I think he's a much more interesting filmmaker than any of the people he draws inspiration from, like them. And I don't know, I think it's interesting as well, like Warner Brothers are quite important in this as well, because they also put Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner.
Right.
And June, his new film June, these massive budgets. And I think what Nolan really represents to me is he shouldn't be an anomaly. It should make everyone else realize how rubbish Hollywood has become, and blockbusters have become.
Yeah.
Because these films are possible and audiences want them.
And I think what's also interesting is that there are sort of pretenders to alternative cinema, if you like, or cerebral cinema, that I think, and he kind of exposes those. I think someone like Tarantino, who's obviously sort of first few films made him renowned for mucking around with narrative structure and order, and the twists were in the structure rather than the story. Yeah. But when I look at, whenever I've tried to sort of study Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs with students, and we talk about, well, why has Tarantino changed narrative? I can't come up with any reason other than he's a filmmaker who likes to make films about films. He likes, he likes to challenge what he knows. Yeah. Whereas with Nolan, I always feel that structural change always has a link to the themes. It can be justified not just as a gimmick, but as actually having a thematic purpose.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's like a bit cheesy and a bit cliche, but I think he is one of those storyteller filmmakers, and we talked about it before, where the aesthetic and the mise en scène and the structure of the film is in service to the story.
Yeah,
and it's just and it just gives this film so much more depth and so much more, makes it much more engaging and much more intriguing for the audience. And I agree with Tarantino. I appreciate the talent. I like Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown, but all I see is Tarantino's hand all over the place. It's unavoidable. And we teach and study Pulp Fiction. We spend half of our lessons talking about other films, because it's just let's just list all of these references in the film, and you've got a lot of the haute points. So I think he's a bit of I always think he's a bit of a pretender. Tarantino, he's a great writer, but yeah.
Why? I mean, like I said, I kept this at number 5 just because I'll never forget the impact. So again, I probably went with heart perhaps a little bit more overhead with this one. But I sort of, my love of Nolan comes from this film. But like I said, it probably could have eked its way into the back end of this. Why maybe does this not end up as our number 1? What are the things that maybe keep it from being amongst his very best work?
I think you hit upon something earlier. You mentioned it. The character development is, it's not great, and that's something I've seen Nolan criticised for throughout his entire body of work. But I don't agree with that at all. But I think in this film, because the structure is so prominent and the nature of how the story is told is so prominent, and there's so many details in it, that we haven't got time for character development. And obviously, insomnia. Amnesia.
You forgot the
doesn't word. Allow. It doesn't allow really to get to know Lenny.
Yes, yeah. It leaves him quite cold and unsympathetic, doesn't he? Which actually, even some of the other flawed characters Nolan shapes are less unsympathetic, if you like, aren't they?
Yeah. And I think that as well, and where it sits within his career, like as you said, it's his first cinema release, and we talked about it with Insomnia, but it very much feels like not an audition almost for Hollywood, or a call to arms, like come and get me. It feels very constructed.
I think that, and part of that actually leads into another criticism of some of Nolan's movies, which certainly this film is guilty of, is a little bit too much exposition. And maybe that's the danger of when you're trying to walk a bridge of cerebral alternative cinema and mainstream sort of reception. Like you said, that one of the absolute genius aspects of this film is it doesn't make you feel stupid. It makes you actually feel really smart for being able to follow it, as it were, when you know something clever is going on. But what that does do is it means that there's a huge amount of plot exposition. There's sequences where Lenny's on the phone to an unknown person, but he's basically just telling the story to us to make sure we keep up. And there are a couple of other movies. There's the odd character in films, Ariadne in Inception, for example, who seem to be there simply as an audience member, just to make sure that we understand what's going on. But I'm not too bothered by that.
No, the only time it's really stood out for me is Interstellar. I can't remember the phrase, but there's a certain scientific phrase that is just said one too many times. When they say it, you're like, all right, come on.
We'll probably come to that when we do Interstellar, but it's the piece of paper with the pencil bit, I think. It's like,
But I don't mind that, because I feel, the depth of a story demands that, really. And I think the visuals and the sound are so overwhelming that, it's still, I find this film's about emotional experiences, not just cold, technical exercises.
That's it. And I think that goes down to, I don't know whether this is our personal preference, the fact that we're going to all this effort to make these, because I think a criticism that could be of this film is it's once you've got the twist, if you like, once you've got the narrative, once you've understood it, it could seem a little bit repetitive. But I've never felt that. I've never felt that, you know, just because I know how this film's going to be ordered, oh, here comes another scene backwards, here comes another scene. Yeah. So what makes it endlessly watchable for yourself then? Because you've seen it probably as many times as I have, I reckon.
Yeah. I think the layers of questions in it, and also how many, I think, you know, when you watch it again, how many, what you thought were right paths, when you realise are wrong paths. So, you know, I think now it's like, I'm just thinking maybe something like, you know, a video game like Skyrim or GTA, something like that. Actually, in the audience's minds, there's more than just the two threads. There's quite a lot, isn't there?
Yeah.
So I think not that it's a different film every time, but it is a different experience.
I love the fact that the clues, and again, this is quite similar to some of Nolan's other work, the clues are there throughout. In fact, he almost leaves them in plain sight. Not just the kind of little things like the fact that that Lenny appears in the flashback of Sammy, but like lines of dialogue. I think one of the characters right at the start says, "That's all backwards," when Lenny explains his condition, telling us basically what the narrative process is.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that the scene, which I love, which again reinforces some of those repeated Nolan ideas of someone lying to themselves, when he hires an escort, and we assume that this is, you know, as a replacement for his wife because he's lonely or whatever. But all he does is he asks her to scatter things around the room, affectations that used to belong to his wife, so that when he wakes up in the morning, he thinks that she's still alive. Which is a really kind of almost a sort of touching moment in terms of making us connect with Lenny sympathetically, but then it leaves us really cold at the thought that actually if he's able to lie to himself, what don't we? It's quite a horrible feeling, that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And again, now next time I watch it, with what you've said about the ending, you know, maybe that scene, like maybe the sympathy will just be stripped away from it, and it'll just be. Yeah, he'll come across as threatening or something like that.
Yeah, possibly. And it does get. I suppose maybe he does become less sympathetic the more you watch it, because you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think maybe as well, part of the appeal, just thinking about how Inception and a few other films end, is that he gives the audience both, doesn't he? Like, think at the end of Dark Knight Rises, you get the heroic end, but you also get you know, the little add-on at the end, and with you know, Carbon Inception, it's up to you to decide. So
that's right, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of his films where you do make your own mind up as to how this ends. He does like to finish on a shot that could go either way, couldn't it?
Yeah.
You know? Brilliant. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, this is clearly a film that we could talk about for hours, and we have done at length with students. But this is a great starter for getting into Nolan, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. And I think just the way it's been structured, doing these videos, not necessarily our order, is that I think there are like 3 distinct phases to his career, and this is the end of the first. Well, the films we've talked about is the end of the first.
That's true.
And I think when we talk about Batman Begins, when he starts teaming up with more co-writers and with Hans Zimmer in particular, I think, you know, he starts like his rise, doesn't he?
And in a way, despite the fact that I suppose watching Insomnia, I think one of the things we mentioned in the last video was that perhaps we were a little bit disappointed that he didn't follow in Memento up with another film that plays with narrative. Maybe that's to his credit, that he just didn't repeat the same sort of format, that he didn't just always go out and out to confuse and stuff like that. You know, a lot of filmmakers would ride that, wouldn't they? But he's always kind of reinventing himself. Yeah,
well, that brings us back to Tarantino, actually, because Mark Commode's got interesting opinions on Tarantino and about his career path and his trajectory, and he talks about like Pulp Fiction was so successful that he tried to repeat it, or, you know, build on that with Jackie Brown, and because that didn't really do well at the box office, Commode said he basically panicked and went back to, you know, a more base level, or the common denominator, where it was just all this postmodern, self-referential stuff.
Yeah.
Where Nolan's films, like his style and his stories, is consistent. The only thing that's changed really is the scale, and the budgets. And you're right, he really stuck to his guns, and I think that for me is what separates him as a true auteur.
Fantastic. That seems like a good place to leave it, because we've covered so much. Brill. Okay, excellent. Well, I think our next one is going to be Batman Begins, and we'll probably use that as a point to work through all three of those films rather than split them up. And that means we'll reveal our 5 to 1s as we get halfway through those. But until then, thank you for everyone watching at home. Thank you, Matt, for joining us again. So Batman Begins next. Excellent.
Yeah, can't wait.
Super. All right, until then, cheerio.
Bye.
Bye.